things happen in ways that we don't understand. And conversations happen like that too, because I always think of the interviews that I do, and it's not just about talking to you or your listeners, it's about what happens to people's minds
Mm.
when they tune into the conversation and how the threads go out from their mind to their mind. And that's why I love doing interviews and
Yeah,
sharing
good for you.
information.
Essentially, we're publishing a book. This every interview you do, like this, your wisdom is going to live on. Maybe people will watch this in 500 years. It. Who knows? You just don't. You can't tell.
Will YouTube be around then?
Well,
I don't.
something will be around. I reckon that we're
Yeah.
the old timers. Maybe they'll look on us as sort of the shamans from the cave days. You know,
Yeah.
the people before the AI, the people before the
Yeah.
robots, but people before whatever's coming. It's a thrill to have you. Thanks for
Oh, thank
come on.
you. That's very, very, very kind. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to be part of your channel.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm thrilled to be finally a member of UFO Research Queensland.
Mm.
I've admired your work from a distance for quite a few years, and
Oh, thank you.
yeah, I always was wishing that I lived in Brisbane so I could get along to the meetings regularly. But now I'm used to doing it by Zoom, and I will always be looking out. Oh, I can be there that time
Yeah,
because it's really nice to meet everybody.
it is. It is. Yeah.
Yeah, but my channel, Viking Superpowers, obviously there's a big emphasis on the Viking Age and earlier, and specifically the paranormal and the possibilities of paleo contact, of beings either from another planet, another solar system, who've maybe been here for a very, very long time, but they're ultimately from somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's my thing, and to talk to somebody like you is a thrill because I've got a lot of followers who watch the channel from Scandinavia.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, it's really
Great.
quite a thrill. I didn't purposely rig the algorithm or anything. It's just it's decided, oh, this guy's really Scandinavian, so I'll feed his channel to Scandinavia. But
You've got a big tick.
yeah, so it's really great, and
Oh, wonderful.
I know they would love to hear about what goes on here because we are,
Mm.
we're sort of a hub, but we're also out in the boondocks, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's yeah, well, thanks to Paul Hogan. Some people know about us. Well, the
Yeah.
Americans do particularly, and the British. But yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's something about Australian voices. It's probably because I'm an Australian, but that wonderful channel Eyes on Cinema,
Yes.
like where they get that stuff, I do not know. But I posted one recently on Facebook that's just all these Australian accounts from the 70s through to seem to be the early 90s. But the way they talk, it's sort of funny. It's just like, wow,
Funky,
I like that. But these lovely
funky.
ladies in their 30s, but they got sort of permed hair and
I
they
know.
talk in that sort of Outer Davison sort of way, and
Yeah.
others are real bushies. Yeah, Struth, we didn't know what it was, mate. And but it just seems so real. Like you think why would a person like this make this up? You know?
Exactly. That's a great channel. I've shared some of their things on our UFO Facebook page, and it's just yeah, it's. I'm surprised more people don't actually take the time to watch it, or because you can tell how many views you've had. And I guess it's a busy life, and everyone doesn't always have an hour or something to sit down and watch everything. I certainly don't.
Yeah, it's a juggle.
Yeah.
But I must admit, it's a sort of a disclosure, that a channel like that, with all that, it's historical records, really, all these television records, and how they got them. I mean, it's pretty obscure stuff, a lot of it.
I'd say they recorded it off the TV because
Right.
I did years ago, stupid me, I was having a clean out and I accidentally threw out a couple of the old videotapes that I'd recorded all the news items that had come up on the TV stations and Current Affair and a couple of other ABC programs and all the 6 o'clock news report. And I thought, where are they? I thought, the only thing I can think is I've actually thrown them out. Oh my God.
Yeah. But it happens to all of us, and I think you learn from that sort of thing, don't you? You realize, oh, that stuff's really precious, and
It is.
that's
Yeah.
why I hoard old books, because my UFO collection is actually probably about three-quarters is old stuff. Like I actively seek out books from the 50s, especially. I don't know if there is such a thing as books from the 40s about UFOs, but yeah, that touches me, that really like an innocent voice,
Yes.
you know.
Absolutely. Oh, look, I tell you, just briefly, sorry to hold us up, but I've been going through our old magazines, which are 30 years old, yesterday, and I've been typing up someone then wrote the early history of the organization, and I was typing it up, and I recognized some of the names. I knew a couple of people who'd since passed away from that time, but when I first had early entry to the subject, and they sort of took me under their wing. And I was getting really teary because
Yeah,
it was so precious. And these people had given up all their free time to do that. And if they hadn't done that, we wouldn't be here. And I was just really emotional. I couldn't explain. I was tapping into that historical sort of perspective.
yeah. I fully relate. It's like mum and dad's, like mum's cooking dinner and dad's out in the shed, maybe making a train set or maybe researching UFOs and sticking them into a scrapbook. And of course, mum's probably doing the same thing. And yeah, I find those voices the most authentic.
Mm,
I do believe people. If people tell me wild stories, which they do, I just believe them. I think, yeah, I'll believe it. Like
yeah,
I'm not one of these cynics. Maybe I'm overly accepting, but I I just accept people and what they tell me. I don't know. I
yeah,
wasn't there.
yeah, same here. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to talk to initially with you about, is your background with the UFO Research Queensland, and how it started, which you've just told us some of it, but did it start as a group putting out a bit of a Roneo Dext magazine, or would have been hand typed?
Yes, yes. In the early days, there were actually UFO Research Queensland actually had originally had a spiritualist flair to it.
Ah,
So the organisation was actually established in 1956, but by 1958, a gentleman called Stan Sears had come along. He was from Sydney, but I think he was from Sydney, came to Brisbane, and a couple of other people who I knew in my early entry to the subject had also joined the organisation around that same time. And it was, they were much more interested in the scientific approach. So Stan Sears became the president. Some of the previous committee members stayed with the organisation, but they took a right turn or a left turn into the more scientific approach. And because they felt that the psychic aspects had nothing to do with the physical reality of UFOs. And I think to myself these days, I wonder what those people would be thinking now with the entry of the word psionics, which really is, ESP and consciousness and all these sorts of things. And yeah, it's taken another turn too. So the
mm,
evolution of the subject is really interesting to me. But from then on, they produced a magazine called Light, They're all hand typed up, and we have a couple of copies, I think, still in our records. You can see them, some of them online as well, with the state Queensland State Library. They have a collection of early UFO periodicals. Yes, and then the organisation kept. They then decided, the new committee then decided, as a feather in their cap, that they would then invite well-known at the time contactee George Adamski to Australia. And that
Mm.
kicked off to Queensland particularly, and that kicked off his world tour. And regardless of what people think of George Adamski, whether he was, he was honest and told his story as it was, or as many of the older researchers thought he was a charlatan, he did something really important, and that is that he travelled around the world igniting a fire within people about the life elsewhere in other planets and in space and visiting Earth. And some of them looked very human. So that was really important. He played his role, no matter what it was, and he
Mm.
played it well.
Yeah, well, that's a great summing up. I told you my story when I did that presentation, and that girl that I met was so absolutely human that I still think, am I just a fool believing what she told me, that she wasn't from this earth? But yes, George's accounts are strangely similar. It's almost like if I'd said yes to her, okay, I'll meet the mothership, and I went down there and the thing actually turned up. Yeah, I could have ended up being another George Adamski if I made it back. Um,
My late father-in-law introduced me to his books because I'd always had I was always predisposed to with an interest in the paranormal, UFOs, anything unusual like that, strange encounters. And so he had, little did I know at the time when I married his son, that um, he had been a member of our organisation many years ago, and he had visited. He had been to see George Adamski when he was giving a presentation in the Brisbane City Hall, and he said there had to be about 2,000 people there. They were streamed outside, and they had speakers up so they could hear as well. He said it was amazing. Um, so and I read George Adamski's books, and after I mean, I've read them a million times, but um, I sort of put them aside for a while because I got involved in 1988, actively involved in the organisation, and I read them, I studied them. George Adamski wrote a small booklet called Cosmic Philosophy, which talks about telepathy as well, and I studied all of those for a long time, and I read all the contactee literature that's been around in the 50s and 60s era. And then I put it aside for a while because then what happened was the abduction reports started to come in. Like I said, I got involved in 88. By 1990, we were receiving those types of reports, and that went on for a good solid 10 years. Like it never let up. It was amazing. And I think about 96, 97, we topped out at about 800 reports in one year, which is a
wow.
combination of sightings and abduction reports. So, yeah, it was full on during the 90s. And, you know, after living through that and looking back at it, you can't help but think something really big went on worldwide in the 1990s because it was being reported by a lot of people. Some of that information got through the non-English speaking barrier. So we heard from people in China, in Japan, but they're the only two I could think of at the moment. But we knew, and Germany and the European countries, we knew that it was going on around the world. And to this day, that at the time, um, I think it was 1992, the MIT at Cambridge, they decided to hold I think it was a 4 or 5 day conference about alien abduction experiences because they were so prolific. And that was in the early days. I mean, we weren't sort of picking that up here until about 1990, and they'd been looking at it for some years before. but not to the extreme numbers that we had during the 90s. And they produced this enormous conference proceedings booklet, which is a hardcover, which I picked up many years ago. And it's amazing the amount. I looked at it, I thought, I'll never be able to read all this and process it all. And since that time, I don't think that the abduction phenomenon has really gotten a good look at. Particularly these days, it's been shoved to the side, you know. So,
Mm.
you know, make of that an agenda if you want, or I don't know why it's just been dropped like a hot potato.
It's a little too real. I think it's too confronting. It often surprises me when I'm reading UFO forums and even books where people can believe almost anything as far as gigantic craft and hundreds of people seeing them, but then as soon as it comes to abductions, like, oh, no. um, I always think, why? Like, you don't have to have a lab coat to be an intelligent, reliable person. And you
Mm.
certainly don't need to have a Bachelor of Science to be able to operate in a scientific manner and tell a logical story. You know, we're all pretty well trained compared to how people were in the past. We all get 12 years if we want to use it, and it's
Mm.
quite high level. I know the physics and chemistry I was studying in year 11 and 12. I remember thinking, my God, is this kid stuff? Like, this is like Einstein. And I was trying to imagine what I'd be doing at university, but that was really fascinating. And I didn't realize there was such a wave in the 90s of
Mm.
talking. But you became a hypnotherapist, was it?
Yeah, yeah. Because what happened with the abduction experiences, people were reporting having missing time, so they wanted to recall what was going on during their experiences when this time was missing. So they would turn to hypnotherapy, which became quite commonplace in that decade. So I thought I have to understand this better, what's going on, these retrieved memories, and are they accurate? So I actually went and trained as a hypnotherapist purely from for that reason. But then I ended up practicing as a hypnotherapist after I finished my training in 2000 till December last year, because then I retired. So, but yeah, it has its shortcomings, but um, it was really a tool that a lot of people used to try and figure out what the heck was going on in that memory lapse, you know.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
I've always wanted to be hypnotized because, as you know, I believe something happened to me when I was a child in the mid 60s. And also that girl that I met, I'd like to be able to just be there again because I know that my memory is a bit dodgy, you know, that I realize there's so much I can't seem to quite grab,
Mm.
like what exactly she looked like and what exactly she said to me. And maybe she said things to me that I just don't remember at all. The thing I worry about, and you'd be able to tell me, is that I'm extremely imaginative. And being a trained artist, I sort of worry that I'm really good at making stuff up. So, how can what is your experience? Do you find that people do make things up, or is it pretty reliable?
No, it's not a reliable tool at all for recalling memories. This is the point. And some of that comes down to the ability of the hypnotherapist. So there's a difference between hypnotherapy or a therapeutic approach and a forensic approach. It's very easy to lead a person while they're under hypnosis.
Mm,
And, you know, just merely asking the question, you know, is it day or night? Is it warm or cold? Just presupposes that that's actually a memory. So
right.
it's almost impossible not to lead someone while they're being hypnotized, because when you're tapping into the unconscious, you're releasing a giant of creativity. So, and then you have, yeah, it's very good for recalling details, small details. But if you have a cluster of details like this, the unconscious wants to fill in the gaps. That's the way it works. It's completely opposite to the conscious mind, which breaks everything down to analyze it. The unconscious synthesizes it to create meaning. So if you if you have hypnotherapy and you have, I mean, one of the rules I was taught very early on was expectation plus belief equals outcome. So if you're already hovering around the UFO field and you're aware of these other people's stories, and you think, well, it makes more sense that this has happened, so there must be something happened in there, then this is what you have to be very careful of. So you can have hypnosis, but there's no guarantee that it's accurate.
Mm. Oh, thanks for that. That's these are all things that everyone wonders about, everybody involved in this subject. And I've noticed over the years that you seem to split your time between pure UFO and near-death experiences and much more esoteric things, you might say. You're very open and welcoming to people talking about stuff that's, out there, and the sort of stuff I'm really into as well. But
Mm.
um, what I in the Viking thing, probably the biggest thing I've discovered, and as I'm talking to you, I'm realizing it's the same as the modern experience, is that there seems to be complete um, symbiosis of technology and human paranormal or their paranormal abilities. It's like you said that the group earlier on sort of changed to be less open, or wanted to get more concrete, scientific, which of course is understandable in the 60s, where it was like, we don't want to fall into disrepute by connecting ourselves to these strange subjects, these fringe subjects. But it's obvious that the phenomenon is somewhere in between. And yeah, I think you're one of the researchers that's doing some of the great work into this. I've still got a lot of your work to watch, a lot of videos to watch, because all of it teaches me and helps me understand, what I'm seeing in these old stories. And which sort of brings me to my next question I want to ask you is the whole concept of paleo contact, of ancient first contact, or, who knows which contact it was, but what people like myself and Paul Wallace and Mauro Biglino and, Eric von Daniken, and there's heaps of people, and I'm sure you are well aware of it all, but what do you think of it? Like, do you have any personal,
Mm.
is it something you've researched?
Well, I've had an interest at times, because it's such a broad UFO subject, such a broad subject, can't focus on everything at the same time. But I've certainly watched a lot of documentaries about ancient civilizations, and I was just having this conversation yesterday, actually, and this is where I blow hot and cold on the whole idea, because the idea that, say, I've heard a lot of people say, well, how did the Egyptians build the pyramid? It had to be aliens. Or other sort of huge monoliths that have been built. How the heck did they do it? We can't do it today. But that statement presupposes that we didn't have a more advanced civilization in the
Mm,
past, so we have to take that into consideration. I do think that the mythology is very interesting. I've always been interested in that various Indigenous groups, have a lot of Indigenous groups actually have these mythologies where they have beings who come from the stars. And I've got
mm,
to wonder, where does that come from? How come there seems to be a lot of those sort of stories from different cultures around the world. I'm just wondering how they sort of emerged. And it's similar to the cave art that emerged around the same time all around the planet. I think it was about 50,000 years ago. I think Graham Hancock talks about that in his book Supernatural. And, how did that all happen at the same time when those people weren't, um, they weren't communicating with each other? So was it that there were, you know, I'm talking about the cases where they depicted cave art of beings that didn't look like us, right? Um, and were there beings visiting the planet around the same time, all around the planet, different cultures, studying them and all that? And did they depict them like they saw them? Or is it to do with consciousness? And for some reason, the human beings at that time suddenly tapped into each other. They might have been triggered by something that caused, because when some sort of, big disaster happens, there's always following it, there's always after they recover, there's a flourishing of creativity. And we have those sorts of stories in our history, and things move on in a different way. So I've wondered, well, is it something to do with that?
Mm.
Is it a combination of both? This is the other thing, because perhaps some of these ancient these beings who visited Earth, and let's just saying that there were some, visited some tribes, but somehow that was communicated through the human consciousness to those who didn't have those visitations, but it actually emerged in their thinking. I
Mm.
don't know. I wasn't there.
Yeah. That was a great summing up, actually. And it really is. I've always been a history nerd, and I got into this Viking thing because I was into medieval castles and knights and Robin Hood and just loved the English, the British history. But yeah, the history of the world is full of these great mysteries. And I totally agree with you that I think it was humans who had a very advanced civilization long, long time ago and went off world and came back. And maybe others tweaked us when we were still more like apes, more some of those hominid types that are obviously not as human as us. But believe it or not, I don't know where I read about it, but I discovered that one of Darwin's co-scientists back in the 1850s became a bit of a maverick, and I downloaded a paper he wrote, a scientific paper, where he's saying clearly humans can't be natural. There's, the lack of fur on the back, a lot of characteristics we have just don't make sense. But he just comes to the conclusion somebody made us, and he actually says somebody from somewhere else. And I'm thinking this is 1850, But he was saying clearly, I really think this must have happened. It's just impossible that, and they didn't know about genetics back then. So it's extremely interesting, and the art has always fascinated me. And as a trained classical artist, when I saw the cave paintings in detail, we had a big book in art school actually full of cave paintings, and me and my friends used to look at it and say, "This is the same." You can see the same knowledge here that we got from the Romans and the Greeks. And I remember in the book, the writer had come to this conclusion that across tens of thousands of years, there seemed to be a continuity of training. Like he really believed that there was a sort of a master apprentice thing that went on for thousands of years, looking at the qualities of this art. And I know for sure people can't draw like that. Like you don't just start drawing like that. You get the odd genius, but there's the difference between just a really smart self-taught person and somebody who's learnt the great tradition is that the subtleties. There's just endless subtleties of ideas that have been, one genius came up with one of those subtleties 500 years ago and passed it on, and it becomes part of the corpus.
Mm.
Yeah, looking at those cave paintings, I always think, oh my God, these people weren't dummies. Like they were
Yeah.
drawing what they saw.
Mm.
So, what you said,
I
those
think
really strange ones.
I think what interests me is the stories where the Indigenous people talk about beings coming from the sky who walked among them, who taught them about agriculture, who taught them art, taught them language, taught them handcrafts, all those types of things. These are mythologies. They taught the people skills that supposedly, according to the mythology, those people actually didn't have previously. And that's a really common mythology amongst Indigenous groups. And I just wonder, we've got the stories of Viracocha and Quetzalcoatl who came down through the Mesoamericans. And I just wonder, like, why are there so many stories that are similar that, in have been passed on through generations like that?
Mm. Mm. Yeah, well, our Australian Aboriginal people obviously didn't build bridges and had the wheel or anything like that. And that's that old European mindset to see that as just totally primitive. But my experience of the Aboriginal people is that they are really advanced in a different way, that they at one with the bush and with that spiritual side of sort of, it's a science, but it's a psionic science. And I went to the outback in '99 for the first time, and I had a vision of an old Aboriginal man with no shirt on and pants with a rope tied up, and he had a big, white grey beard. And he was dancing towards me and he was making this hand signal. And then a couple of weeks later, we were invited to a corroboree on the Oodnadatta track. It's extremely desert, that place. But we went to this wonderful corroboree and there was no other, white Australians there. And I met that man. I know it was him. He came up to me and he sort of greeted me, but he had this smile and I was thinking, whoa, that's you, man, And I didn't really say anything about it, but he looked at me and I felt, I just felt that telepathically he said, yes, how's it going? I told you. And then there was this old grandma doing a dance. It was exactly the dance he was doing that I saw. I literally, it was like the second day we were in Broken Hill and I was going to sleep in the back of this bus and on the dark roof of the bus, it suddenly lit up like a television for me. And I just saw this man and I saw his dance. Many years before that, I met a Presbyterian minister who'd had a mission or a church, way out in the outback. And he said, look, I'll tell you something. I'm not supposed to talk about this because it's not really Christian, but the Aboriginal people have powers that we can't understand. And he told me about an old man who waved at him, an old elder, as he was driving out of town. He said, I'll see you there, boss, I'll see you there. And he said it was 100 kilometres straight road. There's no other way to get to this place. He drove straight there, top speed in his Land Rover. When he got there, this same old man was sitting at the edge of town in a chair. And he said it just shocked him deeply. He said that guy flew there, like there was no way.
I think that you've touched on a very controversial topic, actually, because these days, and let me back it up, because this is a big story and I'm trying to make it really short. My father was a jackaroo, which, if anyone listening out of Australia, means he was a horseman who used to work on people's stations or ranches, whatever you call them. He would run the fence lines, make sure they're all right. He'd muster cattle. He ran away from home when he was very young and he lived amongst the Aboriginal people who taught him everything he knew about horses. So he became this great horseman his whole life. He died in 2019. He had a lot of stories to tell. One of them I'll just quickly segue into was there's a lot of caves on these station properties in the outback, and there is art in there that is really interesting, but he said, we'll never see it because people don't want the public to go on their property, but they should see it because it's fascinating. And possibly some of that is of strange beings who come from the sky. The idea in our current, how could you say, the spiritual movement or New Age movement is that everyone has psychic abilities and that we can all develop them if we practice. See, I don't think that's true. I think there are certain people who have abilities, and I think that's probably true in the Aboriginal culture, that there
Mm.
are certain people in that culture who have abilities. And I actually think that exists. It's some sort of um, biological imperative for survival of a race or a species of animals or whatever we've got. And I think probably and this is just guessing, but I expect that in all species of animals, there are some that are much more aware than the others because they're the first ones to raise the alert when there's danger, right? They're much more sensitive. So I think that the same is the human race, that we are animals as well, if you want to put it like that. We're part
Mm.
of nature, and we have, some of us have, not saying necessarily me, but some have the ability to be more alert, more aware, which extends into extrasensory abilities, which is really very hyper alert intuition, if you could put it that way, I think, developed to such a keen degree that in those people it gets passed on from generation to generation and it comes down the familial line. And isn't it interesting that people who have close encounters um, often have a family history of that? And that, they have developed precognition, they have visions, they just know stuff, and they have relatives in the family, like auntie, whoever, she used to read tea leaves, and my grandmother, she was precognitive, she used to know things, she used to know when people would die, all those sorts of things, but it's in that familial line. So now in shamanic practices that I used to teach, um, in core shamanism, there's this idea that the new shamans are born with the seed within them. And and it has to be triggered by something, whether it's the spirits start talking to them or they have a near-death experience, they're hit by lightning, like Daniel Brinkley was over in the States, a well-known near-death experiencer. He called himself the lightning shaman. I
Mm.
think he was struck 3 times and he survived, because he developed all these abilities. So something has to trigger them. So, but the seed is there and it may lie dormant in their whole life, although I doubt it because that seed's there for a purpose. So, so I think that there are in the human race, it's peppered with people with these seeds, if I could say it like that get triggered for some reason, and then these abilities, these, I guess I call them higher faculties, kick in, and there's a reason for that, which I think has to do with the human race, our evolution, and our survival.
Mm. Cool. And I totally agree with you on that. Indians have a thing called siddhis, which you know, Siddhis. And what I've read in there, they tend to agree with you totally that there's people and family lines where these abilities are inborn, and some people can develop it through meditation, but generally might seem unfair, but some people just have the gifts strongly. I'd like to hear more about your researches into that, into shamanism, and how you see it being possibly connected to this, the phenomena,
Mm.
the beings from the sky. Like, do you think that they pick out people, like visit children that have these gifts, or do you think they might kickstart the seeds in some where it's dormant, but there's a purpose to get them going? Or
Mm. I think my leaning is towards them studying those people, looking in on them or scanning for them to identify them. That's the other thing. Yeah, I did hear I'm just going to tell a quick story I heard many years ago from Paola Harris, the UFO researcher, the Italian-American UFO researcher. Actually, she's a journalist, but got interested in UFOs. And she said that the people with certain DNA are identified by the military, intelligence services, whoever, somehow they can identify them, and they will recruit them from university, and then they will train them because they need them because of those people. There seems to be something in their DNA that activates crashed UFO, crashed alien craft, which the people at that time, I'm not saying it's not like that now, but this was many years ago, they couldn't figure out how to get the damn things working, basically, how to turn them on. So, but they knew that there were some people with certain DNA that could activate them.
Wow.
It sounds very sci-fi, doesn't it? But that's was the story she was telling. That was back in the 90s as well, about 30 odd years ago. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So whether that's true or not, I don't know. It sounds a bit Stargate-like, isn't it?
Yeah,
But
that's.
yeah, but hey, maybe whoever did the Stargate movie actually did some research and found it out.
You think they missed some of us?
I don't know. But this is why I got involved. Became very interested in shamanism because I'd had a series of my own experiences mostly over a 10-year period when I was seriously chronically ill. And it started when the illness was approaching, if I could say it like that. And I had three out-of-body experiences, a near-death experience, a bilocation, many UFO sightings that were really hard to explain at the time. I'd seen my mother's deceased brother who died when he was 4, and a whole lot of other things that I can't quite remember at the moment. And a close encounter with three small beings, standing next to the bed in the wee hours of the morning. And I'm trying to think, because I was interested in UFOs and I was interested in near-death experiences. That was sort of like the precursor to my UFO interest. And I'm thinking, why have I got all these different wide-ranging interests, and why have I had all these strange experiences? And the thing that led me to sort of put it all together was shamanism.
Mm.
Because when people have, or I should say, typical or classic shamans have the precognitive abilities. They have visions. They can have out-of-body experiences. They often have near-death experiences, which starts their journey.
Mm.
Or they can be born with some of these abilities, which elder shamans recognize, so they take them aside and they help them develop those abilities. Um, or they're struck by lightning and they survive, but I don't want to. That's never happened to me, thank goodness. Could you imagine?
So
Anyway,
what started you, do you think?
with me, what?
Yeah, how do you think your natural shamanism was kick-started?
Through the illness, because I didn't understand it at the time, but after I sort of recovered from that, had surgery, etc., um, I realized, and when I found shamanism, I realized for me that was actually an initiation experience. That
Mm.
wasn't what launched me into the UFO subject, but that was probably what kept me on track and broadened my understanding of that. Because when I first became involved, I thought, oh, they're all aliens. They live on a planet somewhere and they come here and then they go away. Now I realize, well, maybe that's not quite the case all the time, that maybe
Yeah.
it's a much bigger story to that. And maybe they're even involved, I'm going to say something a bit controversial again, but maybe they're even involved in the human reincarnation cycle as well. Yeah. So, because there's definitely a connection between near-death experiences, UFO encounters, and the afterlife. And I just haven't figured it out yet. That's probably the next 10 years I'm going to try and figure
Wow.
that out.
Wow, you're incredible. You're really talking my language now. My next book, and I'm not promoting my book here, it's just the subject is so on with what you're talking about, looking into ideas of spirituality in the Viking Age, which are often considered to be lost, but I don't think they are. I think they're pretty much in plain sight if people can just trust the old writers and not think that they were. See that in the Norse thing, because it was written in the Christian times, there's always been this thing, oh, but we can't trust this because it was written by a Christian. And that's in my book. I sort of basically spend the first two chapters saying we can trust this guy. He's not a Christian. I reckon he was definitely a heathen or a pagan or whatever you want to call him. And that this stuff's supposed to be read as real, not just, bedtime myths. So the stories in the Viking stories I found that seem to be obviously some kind of great glowing craft and some kind of light phenomena happens. That person's like a special person and they're taken. And this particular story in Iceland is about a hero called Gunnar from a place called Hlitharenda. And I went there last year. Now, his burial mound's there, and he was the greatest hero in Icelandic story. He's just this sort of Superman, a really incredible dude, but he was a nice guy. He gets killed in this battle as all his enemies come to his farm, and he's outnumbered like 50 to 1, and he does a really good job, but they kill him. But then a couple of days later, he's heard singing in his mound. This famous Jarl, this famous wise man, shaman sort of character, sends his equally pretty far out son, warrior and shaman type, to go and check it out. So they go out with Gunnar's son, Hogni, and this guy, Skarphedin. And they're standing out on a moonlit night. It says there's thick clouds, but the moon keeps appearing, and then the moon's super bright, and they look up to the mound and they see the mound's open, and there's this great light all around. The Icelandic's a little bit vague, but it seems to mean it says there's no shadow anywhere. It sounds like there's a great big light on the mound, and then the mound's open, and then the dead hero Gunnar, who I think got sort of chopped up. I think they took his head off probably, but he's in one piece, and he's turned around and he's looking up at the moon, which is called Tungulskin, which is a cool word. And then he chants this verse about how he did what had to be done. He put his helmet on. He didn't run away from his enemies. He fought them, and now he did it for Battle Freya, the goddess of love and very powerful being, but he calls himself her staff, like a fighting weapon. And then it says there was 4 floating lights around him, and it says the mound closed up. And then the 2 guys, one says to the other, would you have believed that if somebody told you that happened? Another guy goes, no, I wouldn't. If your dad told me, I'd believe it, but anybody else, I wouldn't. And to me, that's just one of those funny, it's like, wow, that's very real. Like, there's something very real about that little conversation.
Mm.
So when I went to Iceland, my friend who just lives down the road from this farm in Iceland, she said, there's nothing to see there, Dave. They've dug into it. There's no body in there. There's no grave. They probably got the wrong place. But I think what's happened is that he was taken.
Mm.
And that led to reincarnations. Like the Viking stories talk about the Einherjar, which means one-man armies. And that's who Odin takes, with the Valkyries come and take them to Valhalla in preparation for the final battle. And I think it's actually a story of reincarnation.
Mm.
Certain individuals get selected and taken. So, yeah, so what you're talking about, I think it's quite proven in at least what I study into. And I'd just like to hear more about how you think that works, as far as them being like physical beings that people meet in abductions, having craft that appear to be metallic, yet there's that aspect of it where they seem to be sort of agents of the great mind or whatever's running the universe. Like, do you think that's how it works? Like, do you think that they could be just in a much higher vibration, for want of a better word, and they operate taking souls? What do you think?
Does it work? Good question. I guess to answer that, I can tell you about some people watching may be aware of the book called The Book of Urantia, which was channeled. It's a huge book, and it was channeled by someone. Oh gosh, must have been. I think it was the 50s. I can't quite remember now. But in that book, it's the history of the earth and history of humanity. And I think I can't quite remember all of it at the moment, but in there, there's a part where they talk about these beings called the midwayers. And the midwayers are beings who take the souls of the dead to a location, or they accompany them, a bit like death walkers, really, in shamanic practice. They accompany people and take them to where they have to go. They make sure they get there, but they don't seem to be. They can be both physical and non-physical. Put it that way.
Mm,
They're
mm,
not just wafting around in the ethers, right? They can. You can see, touch, feel. So. And I've wondered, could there be some sort of alien beings that can also be physical and both non-physical at the same time? I mean, that's a really interesting question, whether it's dimensional, whether just shifting in and out of dimensions or phasing in and out of dimensions like they do on Star Trek. Um, yeah, Star Trek. Or whether they actually have that capacity or have evolved it over time. I don't really know. They have had technological advances that allowed them to do that as well. Again, I don't know. That's something to wrap our heads around too. So we have to think that we have, like, in the dimension that we call the afterlife, for example, we have no clue who populates that. But I certainly think that there are beings who can traverse that dimension or live in it, and can make their way to our physical reality as
mm,
well.
mm.
So, but how that works, I have no clue. But I'm just putting that all together from the stories that people have told me over many years about their experiences.
Yeah. So have you made videos about this, like other videos, or have you written anything?
Not really, no. I did do a recording on my afterlife discussions channel. I made it private for a while because something said just sit on this for a while, because it was all about the connections between UFOs and the afterlife. But then YouTube locked me out of that channel, like, because it was private. I can't get in there and make it public, so I
Oh,
have to
really?
redo it.
I wonder why that is. You're such an interesting person. That's why I've been excited to talk to you because you're a wealth of information and thinking. You know, it's yeah, you don't have to go to university to be a professor. You know, you're
No, yeah, I think with the UFO subject, we really have to take an eclectic approach. That is so important. We can't just come at it from a scientific approach. It doesn't, science is really great. It has a place, it has its proper place, but it can't overstep those boundaries of science because it's just not going to give us the answers.
mm,
It just can't, because it hasn't developed to that level yet that we need to be able to find answers to these questions.
yeah. It's like you would probably know this, but some of the real pioneers of quantum physics theory said the future is about a science of consciousness,
Mm.
and that consciousness is beneath matter. You know, consciousness is what everything arises from.
Yeah.
That's exactly what you're doing, you know, and your research, and so many people are researching things that sort of bit unexpected, that those, like what you just said about people being in, you know, different dimensions and being involved in reincarnation and those things. That's a bit surprising for a lot of people that it could be at that high level. And
Mm.
I guess religion in some ways, I don't know if it's always purposeful, but organized religions tend to discourage this sort of thinking because it's, you know, here's the script. No, sorry, you've got to stick to this.
They're no longer the middlemen.
Yeah, and I think that's why this is such a great period, despite lots of gloom and doom out there. People worry about things, but we are free, at least in this time, to think wild things and
Mm.
not get persecuted. Uh,
Yes.
you
Yeah.
know, and we can do something for the human race, help set us free. How what would your advice be to those of us who'd like to, you know, become more of a shaman, especially if we feel like we've had a seed in us that's been awakened? What
Mm.
what would your advice be, or is there any books that you would point us to, or research?
I would suggest that you practice shamanic journeying. That's what I used to teach. So, and once you do that, and once you make that connection to the intelligence in everything, that it never goes away. You know, like someone said to me when I retired last year, aren't you going to miss doing this? And I said, no, because it's within me. I'm carrying it wherever I am. I'm aware of, you know, everything around me. So, um, and doing shamanic journeying really revealed a lot of information to me. It's like the answers to our questions are all around us, but
Hmm.
we can just tap into it. And when I did my very first weekend training with a lovely lady, I sort of went there as a skeptic on the Saturday morning, and Sunday morning, Sunday night I came home and like my mind was blown, you know,
Yeah.
like I always thought it'd be really hard to write a book, but I could just do shamanic journeys and type up my experiences, because what happens is you go into an altered state of consciousness to the beat of a drum, of a medicine drum, and the
Mm.
brain, the mind becomes entrained. So, and you can visit the past, you can visit the future, you can speak to the spirits of the land. I discovered there's a very angry Aboriginal man who's looking after my neighbourhood here, doesn't like what's gone on. But and one particular experience I wanted to share was that in one journey I had this vision where I was in the outback, but it was desert. And I could hear a sound and I could see a light off in the distance. And as I approached it, I could see it was a group of Aboriginal people who were having a corroboree. They'd had a big bonfire and they'd done the dance and they were sitting around. And then I looked everything happens or can happen in slow motion in this too. You sort of like it's all symbolic and it's very organic, and you sort of vision turns around and I saw this Aboriginal man standing there with a spear, and he just goes, and I looked up, and above where they had the campfire was this big spaceship. And the message was, it's always been this way. So you get these messages about things that you then got to try and unravel. And it's the unraveling that helps you think outside the box.
Mm.
Say it like that. Yeah. Because when we inquire in that, and particularly in that realm, you know, we're getting new neural pathways being laid down in our brains, and we can suddenly start to think in different ways, and it opens our mind up. Yeah, and I was also really surprised too that that weekend, that first weekend, two girls who had no interest in UFOs had a vision where they saw spaceships. They described seeing spaceships, and they went, wonder what that means, you know. And the facilitator and myself, because she'd had experiences and I had, and we just both looked at each other and went, okay, they're going to wake up one day, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. It's very different to meditation and hypnosis. Everything is very basic. Like you talk, the beings that we deal with there are animals, trees, stones, and you know, a twig in the side of your body could indicate where you've had a surgery, for example. But it's all these really basic organic materials that come up, and it's like it somehow in that situation where you're listening to the drumming, there's something about the drumming that it sort of helps us really tap into something ancient and indigenous within us. It's
Mm.
it, it predates everything, you know, it goes back to the beginning. And those images arise which have meaning that we have to figure out then.
Wow. I'm really relating to what you're talking about, and I'm very keen to practice that. So, do you run courses, or is
Well, I
it?
did until I retired last year.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's people around who will teach shamanic practice. But it's up to you. And you're often it's up to you what you get out of it as to how much you put into it, like
Mm.
anything. Um, And you can be tested along the way in these experiences because there are gatekeepers
Mm.
between realms. So, for instance, when I did my first shamanic journey, the idea is you go down into the ground because you're looking for a power animal. So you're looking for an opening in the ground or at the base of a tree, and you go down into the earth. And anyway, and then I came out. Sorry, I'm getting that confused. When I was doing that, I was going down in a spiral, like the shells that you find on the beach that
Mm.
have the edges are missing, like those shells. And then all of a sudden, this dog, this three-headed dog, Cerberus, arises and it's snapping at my heels. So I'm going up, 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 up to try and get out of it. And I snapped out of it. But I didn't realize later until more experiences that that was a gatekeeper. It
Mm.
was really saying to me, are you really ready for this? Do
Yeah,
you
right.
really want to go there? You know? So, but then I went back because I really did.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it frightened the heck out of me.
yeah. I imagine it did. I think that's, for a lot of people, it's that not exactly fear of the devil, but like I've never done a Ouija board because I was really inculcated with a Christian idea when I was young that there's demons there. If you get into that, they'll come into you and you can't get them out. This sort of thing, and I've sort of passed that, but yeah, there is a sense of we've lost so much from our own indigenous practices. We haven't got guides. We're looking for guides, looking for people like yourself who can give us wisdom from experience. And I was wondering, you probably have read Carlos Castaneda.
Some of it a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not everything.
Do you know the book called Journey to Ixtlan?
Oh, I've heard of it. I don't
Third book.
know if I read it.
Ah. He wrote several books, of course, but the
Mm.
first two were sort of centered on peyote and drugs and that sort of thing, breaking the world, as he calls it. But then the third book was given to me by a young guy who was sort of like a shaman in Byron Bay back in '93. He was just one of those young, cool dudes. I thought, wow, who are you, man? There was just something about him. He was sort of I think he was a Latin American guy, but he said, you got to read this book. And he said, I was saying to him, I don't smoke. I used to in the 70s, I used to smoke a bit of marijuana and I was into that whole finding yourself through, marijuana mainly. And then I moved right away from it and I haven't touched it since, 79. But I was saying to this guy, I'm just not into the drug thing. And he goes, well, that's the higher way. And you should read this book by Carlos Castaneda about how to do it without the drugs. And it's very much like you're talking about. It's just this incredible story of getting taken out in the desert by this old Indian shaman and, there's just strange things going on all the time.
Mm.
And yeah. So, but if you haven't read it, I think you'd like it. It's one of those books that people say, "Oh, this is all a lot of rubbish. The guy made it up." And
Mm.
whenever I read it, I think, I don't know. I don't think this is made up. There's something so authentic about this.
We
And,
certainly don't need drugs to enter these altered states of consciousness.
no.
Amazing the power of the medicine drum. But you also have the Sufis who do the twirling too, don't you? And they go into altered states of consciousness as well. And then you have um, the groups of people, I think they're in the Middle East. Oh no, they're still the Sufis, that's right. But there are others who can, put nails through their arms and there's no
Yeah. Right.
bleeding. And there's all these things can kick in when you're in an altered state of consciousness. And so it's no surprise to me that when that happens, miracles can occur, because it just triggers these higher faculties and then other abilities take over if that's in you.
So the drumming takes you out of the normal logical mind and uses the unconscious, or
Yeah, yeah. Now this is another interesting thing because when I did a journey, my first journey, it was to find a power animal, my power animal. Everyone tries to, and then once you find a power animal, you always work with it in all your future journeys because it's your protector. It gives you guidance. And mine was a deer. And um, it's really interesting how we embody some of the characteristics of our animals. But anyway, um, and I thought, well, that's really interesting. I thought I had something silly, like not silly, but odd, like a shark or a walrus or something like that. I don't know what I was thinking. Octopus. Um, anyway, the facilitator, she said that you'll get that information, but then in this reality, it has to be corroborated 3 times before you know for sure that that is your power animal. Well, I came home that night, on the Sunday night, and it was the first night here that they released the advertisement for the Bogue beer, which
Mm.
was a whole pile of deer running down the road
Wow.
as part of the ad. And then the next day, my daughter came home from high school and she said, oh, look what my friend gave me. And it was one of those coffee warmers, but on the front was a deer with mushrooms at its feet, which, represents a shamanic sort of experience. And then the third one was, and this is going back pre-social media, was when we all used emails, and that was the only way to communicate. And I received on one day about 5 of the little clips of people sending me, "Oh, isn't this cute?" And it was little deer running around here and there and everywhere in different sort of clips. I thought, okay, I got it. I got the message, So, how does something that you see in a different realm come to this realm? How does it manifest into this realm? And I think that if we could figure that out, that might be how we can have beings in the universe that can be both physical and non-physical.
Mm. Yes, that's a very good question. I love that about the deers. That's I it brings up for me that I don't know if you can have two spirit animals, can you?
Yeah, yeah.
But I had because I'm really into kung fu and the kung fu I practice is very mystical. I had like dear old man who's an absolute kung fu master, old Chinese man. He came out from New Zealand and ran some workshops. And he sort of took me aside. He treated me as somebody special. He recognized something in me. And he told me a few things he didn't tell other people. And one of the things he said is when you move your arms, move them like a butterfly opening its wings. And I was just instantly, I just felt that. It was like, because we're all about softness. And I
Mm.
just thought about how soft a tiny, super light butterfly is just with the wings. I can't remember exactly how long after, but I was meditating about this. And my wife, Lizzie, gives me a crocheted butterfly that she'd made. And I went, oh, wow, that's beautiful. Thank you. And it felt significant. And I put it in my training area, which I call my quoon, is Chinese word. And then my son came home from school. This is no joke, with a colouring in of a butterfly. He said, "This is for you, Dad." And there was another one. I just can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but there was another butterfly happened.
I always say to people the best way to confirm things is to, do a shamanic journey, um, to a journey specifically to find your power animal, and you'll probably be surprised what actually comes up.
Yeah.
May not be either of those, but what happens with the spirit animals is that we work with different ones at different times. So you may have a butterfly and a lion hanging around, but they may not be a power animal.
Mm.
The power animal is the one that, like I said, protects you, it guides you, and you embody the characteristics of it often.
I guess the last question. I could talk to you forever to tell the truth, but um, I don't want to keep you too long. But what would be your advice? Can you think of a book or a particular person to listen to about shamanic journeys? Like, somebody who's very influential on you that I could,
Yeah,
viewers, I could go and check out.
well, a well-known author is Sandra Ingerman. Start with her. Sandra Ingerman, she's been around a long time, teaching for a long time. She has a great book called, which is like a textbook actually, Awaken to the Spirit World. Yeah, it's like a textbook. She tells you how to do it all.
Wow, cool.
Good book. But there's nothing like practice.
Yeah. And what about the drum? Like, does it matter what sort of drum it is, or should it be more like an actual shaman drum?
I find that having an actual drum being beaten is good, but I've also done journeys to recorded drumming, and I think in the back of that book she actually has a CD.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, where with about four different types, four different drumming sessions. I think it's that one. Yeah.
Could I just tell you a quick shaman drumming story?
Please.
Came up as you were talking about this, but I know just before we had kids, we moved up from Sydney and we'd spent all our money on the move and we were, just making ends meet, but I didn't have work. I was at uni. So we needed some money and I'd been listening to Aboriginal corroboree singing from the 60s that had been recorded by this guy. And I was really into it. I just loved it, just singing. And I'm driving along and I'd been playing this tape and I just started singing money, right? I started singing money, 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 money. And it sort of took me over and I started drumming on the steering wheel like boom, 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 boom. And I drove for about half an hour and I did enter a deep place, like I was watching the road, but I was just my singing, my deep voice, and the drumming on the steering wheel. So I pull into this new place we have, and Lizzie used to always get the mail, and something said to me, "Stop and get the mail." Uh, Stop, get the mail. All right, so I pulled up. I go over. I open it up. There's a letter from my dad. It's a pretty rare event, I opened it up. Now, my dad had probably lent me $50 once. He was very Scottish. He loved me, put me through school and all that sort of thing, but he just wasn't one who threw money around. I opened it up. There's a check for $1,000. It's just, I was going, money, money, money. So I taught my kids to do that when they were little. We used to do money corroborees sometimes and,
Oh,
to
I
bring.
thought, I thought you were going to tell me that you discovered that the word money. I thought you were saying money, was some sort of, great Aboriginal word.
Who knows? It might be. I was just literally singing money.
Yes,
It was.
money.
I was just because I'd been listening to these tapes for so long. I could sort of channel these people. I
Yeah,
could just really feel their way of singing. Was that shamanism?
could be. You could have been calling it in. Who knows? Yeah,
Yeah,
very interesting though.
definitely called it in.
Things work in very mysterious ways, just on that point, I had a huge tree out the front of my house that had to be cut down because the roots were starting to starting to come into the garage. And it cost me $6,000 to have it cut down and taken away.
Mm.
But oh, wow, $6,000, that's a bit of a chunk. Not that long afterwards, I got a check in the mail for $6,000. It was something that my late husband had taken out with the bank decades ago, which I never knew about. And they said, we're shutting this down now. Here's your money.
Wow.
Exactly, $6,000. Like, what are the odds of that?
Yeah.
And I thought,
Well,
he's still giving from the grave, bless him.
it's impossible to be just a coincidence. People who say it's a coincidence, it's like, nah, yeah, yeah, monkeys typing out War and Peace,
Yes, yeah,
say, but this is people like us know this
yeah,
is how it works.
yep, exactly.
Those experiences just get you more and more and more convinced as you go through life, don't they?
Mm.
Anything else you want to tell us? Like, how's your schedule? Like, are you?
I'm fine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm loving talking to you. And I could always make this two episodes. Are
Okay.
you okay to keep talking? Because
I don't mind talking. I just I'm happy to talk. I think these subjects are really important. And like you were just saying, things happen in ways that we don't understand. And conversations happen like that too. Because I always think of the interviews that I do, and it's not just about talking to you or your listeners, it's about what happens to people's minds
Mm.
when they tune into the conversation and how the threads go out from their mind to their mind. And that's why I love doing interviews and
Yeah,
sharing
good for you.
information, you know.
Essentially, we're publishing a book. This every interview you do, like this, your wisdom is going to live on. Maybe people will watch this in 500 years. It. Who knows? You just don't. You can't tell.
Will YouTube be around then?
Well,
I don't.
something will be around. I reckon that we're
Yeah.
the old timers. Maybe they'll look on us as sort of the shamans from the cave days. You know,
Yeah.
the people before the AI, or people before the
Yeah.
robots, but people before whatever's coming.